You just heard War from the eponymous Burzum record. This is Requiem Metal Podcast. I'm Mark.
And I'm Jason.
And this episode brought to us by generous donation from Miss Shawna Perez, who thank you very much for your executive producership this week.
Yeah, and that's like the third or fourth, maybe even the fifth episode in a row we've had executive producers, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
So and we even have one lined up for the next episode too. So.
I think it's almost neck and neck, male and female, which is very encouraging.
We have just like Justin Bieber. I was telling Mark, we have apparently a female following out there, at least female following that's willing to donate. So
yeah, well, this is Women's History Month, isn't it?
It is. They get their own month finally. And Black's
it's not like Black History Month, the shortest month of the year.
Yeah, shortest month of the year. So, but so it's Burzum time, and it's kind of odd. Mark and I, in our own sort of separate ways, have been on, I guess, our own separate Burzum kicks, and mine, oddly enough, started from pulling out a lot of ambient Radiohead records, and when the new Radiohead came out. For some reason, I backlogged through Kid A and Amnesiac and other records, and for some odd reason had this impulse to just start pulling out a lot of Burzum stuff.
I know Burzum and Oliver are big hits with indie rock people.
Yeah. And I mean, it makes sense because honestly, like when you listen to Det som Engang var, like right next to like some of the stuff on Kid A, it almost made sense. It was weird, so. And then, of course, Burzum has a new record that's coming out and will probably be out pretty close to when you hear this podcast if you're listening to it.
It'll be out the Tuesday after.
Yeah, so the 15th of March.
15th of March,
so, But,
well, one thing, just to set the record straight, we're not going to talk about his storied past or storied. Is it storied or storied past?
Sordid or storied.
Or storied, okay.
Yeah,
so I was wrong both times. But
I wasn't aware he even had one, to tell you the truth.
Well, yeah. Well, I'm sure everybody has heard of his, might have killed somebody, might not have, might have burned some churches, whatever. We're not going to get into that. We're not going to get into discussion if he's an Aryan, if he's a Nazi. I really don't give a shit.
I'm pretty sure he's probably an Aryan in terms of like, where he comes from.
But as far as be like
a
Aryan
member
Brotherhood,
of the Aryan race or something, or of the
anything like that. So I really don't care about what his social leanings are. In the past, I've boycotted Burzum for a long time because of those things, but I can justify it to myself now.
Yeah,
and, I think since he got out of prison, there's not quite so much of that stuff bubbling to the surface. It's not so obvious, although a lot of people that interview him still kind of go back to all that, and just like I'd really rather just hear about what he's doing musically, because somehow he's managed to have like a 16-year gap and still come back pretty like right on the money. Mm-hmm. And even people like like Fenner is having it one of his top albums of last year for Belus, and it's been actually reviewed really, really well.
Yeah, and I know Jay Bennett was a big fan of it too.
Yeah, go back and read, kind of discover a lot of the stuff, pre-Filosofem, which is kind of the big record. But
yeah, and it's I think myself, having missed the first and I guess the original part of the second wave of black metal by the time I finally got into it, was 95. And at that point, it was kind of had run its course in terms of a lot of the controversies had already happened.
Already in jail.
Yeah, and so I didn't. I guess from that standpoint, I always avoided Burzum, and I in my own way, like you said, kind of boycotted it and stuff. And it's been kind of through the years that I've sort of I think you have to come to your own personal kind of conclusions of how to approach this music if you want to approach it.
Well,
and you can
I
distance
justify
yourself
it
from the politics of it.
By not being a historian of music, a student of history. I think it's definitely something that people should have in their collection, or at least be aware of. I just don't get back patches or T-shirts.
Sure, and plenty of people who make great music have been terrible people, and so I mean, one of the people I'll actually compare Burzum to later on in the show is Phil Spector, in a weird kind of way. I'll get into that later, but and he's not a very good.
Oh, Varg's got better hair.
He does have and more of actual eyebrows, I think.
Yeah.
But every time I think of Phil Spector now, I think of the dude from Lost Highway. It doesn't have any eyebrows, just standing on the road all the time. But yeah, anyway, so I mean, there's again. I know friends I've talked to who kind of tread lightly in terms of how, whether or not they even want to approach Burzum. And so we're just going to kind of run through some of our favorite tunes, I guess. I mean, in no way is this going to be the entire history of Burzum. I mean, we're barely exploring a lot of the older stuff, just kind of giving you little brief vignettes of it. But I think a little goes a long way with Burzum. If you like what you hear here, you're going to go back and check out some of the full lengths and
I think
get in that mood.
They're definitely, and I probably sound like a broken record, but they're definitely one of those bands that their records are meant to be heard in their entirety. They're not necessarily a singles band.
Although the song we open up with, War, stands out from the rest of the songs on the self-titled. It's kind of an oddball.
It sounds like almost like a better put together early Mayhem song.
Yeah.
With how there's a lot of like weird punk influence and just all that, come on, yeah.
Yeah, the beginning very Tom G. Warrior.
And actually,
you said Kronos from Venom.
Yeah, a lot of, there's a Euronymous solo in this as well, which... Yeah.
It's a
kind of funny since giving what their history would become, but
and it's also kind of cool too because it's so rare. Other than the, I do believe it's on Det Som Engang Var that Samoth plays bass.
No, it's the Aske EP.
Oh, it's the Aske EP. Okay. Yeah. Other than the Aske EP with Samoth, it's really the only time that Varg ever had guest musicians.
He had a live drummer.
Oh, okay, live, but not on record.
He was never. He recorded all of his own drums, from best I can gather.
Yeah, and so we're talking about again Varg Vikinrins, if you or Count Grishnak or Burzum, all these different
the candy selling Count.
Yeah, all these different names, but it's one singular guy that's making most of this music. And as you heard, he's clearly coming from the old school roots of black metal. In a song like War, you heard the Venom, you heard the Bathory, you heard even the Hellhammer, Tom G. Warrior kind of stuff. And it comes off the debut record, and I guess the older style of Burzum, you could kind of put it akin to like Transylvanian Hunger or Nathan's Madrigal, or it's very unsettling, very lo-fi produced.
It was anti-music. That was kind of the idea. Even the production was meant to sound. And I don't know if it was necessarily always... Well, a lot of it was a big fuck off to death metal bands because there's all that... everybody wants to sound like Morbid Angel and stuff. And they're like, well, we want to sound... have this completely otherworldly kind of vibe to this. But we should mention this is from 1992. It's Deathlike Silence Productions, Euronymous' label, the second release.
Second release after Merciless, right? Merciless was Deathlike Silence. I believe
that was number one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this was limited to 1,000 copies on vinyl.
And produced in the famous Grieg Holland studios by Python, who did most of the early Burzum stuff. I think except for Filosofem. He did everything up to Filosofem, which was more of a compilation record anyways, and we'll get into that later. But the other cool thing about War, from the debut record, it's
also a Bathory song, but not the same song.
Oh, but it almost feels like that too. It opens up side Winter of the record. Yes. The first four songs were side Hate. So you have side Hate.
I think wasn't there a side Darkness and side Evil on something like an Abruptum record or something?
Probably something like that. And even though it doesn't sound like a lot of the rest of the record, a lot of the rest of the record sounds a little bit closer to the stuff we're going to play in a moment.
The more repetitive, long songs.
And the shrilling vocals that are just like really unsettling.
Well, there's a little bit of that in War, but it's just it's kind of. I mean, that was one of the
more catchy than the other stuff.
The vocals were the one thing early on that turned me off. Like Dark Throne, I could get behind that as a kid, but first, like hearing some Burzum stuff, just like, God, this sounds awful.
Yeah, and some of you may have some issues with the vocals if you haven't listened to a lot of old Burzum before. So we're going to kind of give you that I guess parental advisory or warning.
We thought about
as open-minded as you can.
A two-parter with us, and we're like, I think that's just kind of
it probably just wear people out. Horse, like we were kind of leaning. I kind of wanted to squeeze my Journey to the Stars in, but we just didn't have time, and that would be like I guess a prime slab of like early Burzum, but you can glean that from some of these other songs anyways. But one thing I do want to say about War that's kind of interesting is this song is really predictive of like the movement that's going to emerge kind of post this record, like the black thrash movement, like Ara Noir and Niflheim and some of that kind of stuff that's like more groovy, more Destruction, Sodom kind of oriented,
Teutonic,
more Teutonic. There you go. But it's not. I don't know. It's not the most representative of that record, but I think Mark and I, being the tricksters that we are,
contrarians,
like to fuck with people a little bit. And there's a lot of people who hate this song, especially like diehard cult black metal.
This was always one that stood out to me as being like entertaining. And I also wanted to get something on here early that was kind of unrepresentative of the band, just to show the diversity of what some of this older stuff sounded like.
Yeah. So, and that's kind of why we went with what we did. But, the stuff that we're mostly playing on the first half of the show is all the pre-prison recordings and stuff. We're going to thankfully avoid anything that he did in prison, which people kind of know has a kind of bad reputation for being just like shitty keyboard type music. And
and the reason behind it is even worse. That I don't want to use guitars because it's instrument of the blacks and all this, and I was just okay. Plus they were just terrible.
Yeah, just bad music is bad music, So, but the next place they went is they put out the Aske EP, which featured kind of a notorious photo of some burning churches and stuff, which brought some notoriety. And it was 3 songs, a re-recording and 1 song, but the middle song, which we'll play in a not next, but the second, after the song we play, that will start off the next set. Dominus Sathanas is more of like a kind of like a small symphony, kind of like a Burzum kind of thing. It's very despairing. There's very little vocals. It's essentially an instrumental, but yet it kind of tells its own musical story. It's different than
he said it reminded you of like some of the interludes for Blessed Are the Sick from Morbid Angel.
Sure, that almost kind of like more thought out,
and not quite as pompous as some of the stuff off Morbid Angel.
Definitely don't want to piss Varg out there by comparing him to Morbid Angel, which might be the utter the antithesis of what he stands for. But actually, prior to recording Aske, they actually recorded the second full length, which is Det som Engang var, which stands for What Once Was. And it's just they decided to release Aske prior to that. So
it's confusing to say the least of how this stuff is released.
And then Aske later shows up on the back end of the Burzum self-titled. That's how you can really find it now. You can't even find the Aske EP.
Oh no, there's no way in hell you're going to find it.
It's expensive as hell.
And Aske means ashes.
Oh yeah, well, there you go. Which
makes sense.
Yeah. So, but the next song we're going to kind of play, which is, for my money, and I think Mark was the one that picked this song, and called Lost Wisdom, off of Det som Engang var, is probably like one of the catchiest or poppiest songs of the early Burzum stuff. But there's like a melody below below the kind of like the hate-filled vocals that are like so reminiscent or so
present there.
Yeah. And it's the genius of Varg, is that he's able to sort of meld a lot of different musical layers, underneath what sounds like really poorly recorded music. It sounds really lazy almost. I mean, in a weird way, Varg is like the pavement of black metal, like it's like Slacker.
He's the Steve Malcolmus of Satan.
Or something like that. It's so bizarre that he's able to sort of fool people almost, like upon most early listens, like first couple times I heard all these old Burzum stuff, like I didn't really think too highly of it. It didn't do much for me. I didn't really hear the subtleties and the different layers that were sort of going on.
I think it takes kind of a trained ear to fully appreciate it. I think I appreciate it way more now, of course, than I would, when I was a kid and looking for. Dark Throne was about as over the top as I went.
Yeah,
back then for that stuff.
And I think a lot of it too for you and I is that we've gone through such a series of listening to things like Albert Eiler or even the the really heavy duty Coltrane stuff, or Cecil Taylor in the jazz realms, and then some of the more like just outright noisy stuff, the Velvet Underground or like Tony Conrad or any of those sort of avant people have sort of done
Noy and Can and that kind of stuff
and it's almost like cycled us back through. And so like I don't hear this stuff the same way I did back in 1995 when I first like approached it, and it just sounded like somebody recorded something on a cassette tape, like a bad like 6th generation dub.
Yeah,
the static kind of pouring out at you. Now like the static almost adds like a warmer tone to some of like the riffs and some of like the things that are happening.
Oh, absolutely.
The only thing that's just so so still difficult, maybe not for you and I, but difficult for I think a lot of people, would be the vocals. And so
the vocals are harsh. I'll give him that.
There's no way to apologize for him. That's just part of what he's trying to do. But nowadays they're not really that over the top. No. I think he a lot of the basic themes of Burzum, besides some of the fantasy Tolkien elements that you find in a couple of the earlier records, are things like, despair and mournfulness and things. I mean, it's not as like
nihilism,
overtly satanic maybe as some of the other black metal stuff that was coming out, but it's very nihilistic. It's anti everything, like you said, anti music in a way, and so
anti mosh,
anti mosh, which was the anti roadrunner,
anti earache,
okay, mosh, duh. Not thinking quite straight, but so again, that's it depends on what your musical experience is, how you'll approach this, and so maybe the first time you hear some of these songs, you're really not going to know where to go with them, but so we're gonna start with Lost Wisdom, which really plays on a Dark Throne kind of Thorns riff is sort of built into there.
I think it has kind of one of the quintessential, there's like probably 2 or 3 different like quintessential Burzum riffs, and I think this song really has the one that I'll mention.
And lyrically, it's again exploring the planes of existence, just
existential,
very very existential. And then we'll go into the Dominus Sathanas tune from the Aske EP. It's again very like its own little small symphony, very despairing riff. Only one sort of vocal scream, it's like it's very minimal but yet like full in a weird sense. And then we're going to close out with a song which we'll talk more about when we come back, but I do want to set it up because I want you to sort of be prepared for it. If for my money, this is my favorite piece of Burzum music. It's sort of an epic tune. A lot of Burzum and black metal fans would rank this as the Burzum song, and there's even a lot of people that say that this is the black metal moment. Like if you were to take one song, I don't know, Mark and I will kind of maybe talk about that when we come back. I kind of don't know if I wholly agree with that, but it's an interesting thought. But so when you get to this song, I recommend taking some quiet time and really like being contemplative. It's very much a headphone song because it starts off with 3 minutes of sort of like introductions before even a guitar riff comes in, it's not like a song that you're just gonna like pick up on a catchy beat or something like that. So just kind of fair warning to get into that headspace before you hear this song, which of course means what once was. So enjoy Lost Wisdom, Dominus Sathanas, and Det Sam Engang var.
I
Detsam Anganvar, Dominus Sathanas, and Lost Wisdom there. So that tune that you just heard, I told Mark to be forewarned because I had a few thoughts that I just wanted to sort of, talk about it. It's very mournful, very contemplative. The thing I can say is that, Burzum's definitely like, a band that wants to personify evil in a lot of ways. And I feel like this song itself is that in a way, in that it's an incantation or almost like a spell or something like that. I mean, it's very like hypnotizing in that it's trying to bring you into like a different state of consciousness almost.
Well, I think hasn't been quoted as saying, at least when with Filosofem, that the writing was almost like casting a spell or creating some kind of alchemy.
Yeah, and I think this is it. Like if he like gets it's like magic in a bottle, for a moment, and even probably with Dunkelheit, which we'll be hearing a little bit later, but it's very dangerous, but it's also very beautiful. I mean, it's all those things that like people find intriguing about horror movies or evil or any kind of witchcrafty type thing, and I don't want to go too far with that, but it really, the vocals don't come in for quite a while, and when the vocals finally come in, they're almost used like very sparingly throughout, almost kind of as a weapon to like unsettle you in a way. I mean, I think there's a lot of really contemplative things in what he's doing there. There's no like, like in Lost Wisdom, the vocals are kind of normally there. They're like where they're supposed to be. Yeah,
pretty stock.
The swirling keys that you find in this, the weight of the song is very like, it's all over the place. And as I said before at the beginning of the show, to me, this is like almost the lo-fi kind of Phil Spector kind of mood that it's giving. It's got this wall of sound to it. Even though Phil Spector is known for his perfection of recording, this is like the anti of that. But yet it's there. It's kind of bringing you into that kind of thing.
Painting the same picture, but just on opposite ends of the spectrum.
And I guess if someone were to ask me like what black metal is, I'd probably show them this song and Freezing Moon, to tell you the truth. Like, because I feel like they capture like Freezing Moon captures like the sort of the speed and the intensity. And this captures like that sort of despairing, like utter pit of blackness kind of mood setting that you get out of black metal,
Yeah.
And the thing that gets me really is if you get into the proper headspace and you get to that 8-minute mark, to me it's like it's exactly what the title of the record that it comes from is, which the title of the record escapes me, Hvis Lyset Tarus, which means if the light takes us. And to me, this is that moment, the 8-minute mark when that guitar like solo kind of comes in. If you're really in the right headspace, that's like this like spiritual death or enlightenment kind of moment. Like you're just like, whoa. And I remember this is the song that I listened to over and over and over again all last week. And I kept bugging Mark and telling him like, I just can't stop listening to this song. And I think that's why, it's like this, it's a spiritual song in a way. And it's like, that's kind of his statement.
His anti-spiritual song.
Yeah, his anti-spiritual song.
Everything's got to be anti.
His spiritual badness. So
his spiritual black dimensions.
Well, and then this is really the last album that's not recorded, but released before he gets into some legal troubles.
And goes to prison for a while.
But he did record a record. It just didn't come out until 1996 when he was already in prison. And he kind of recorded different pieces of this record. And that's kind of been known as the, for some people, the quintessential, Burzum record. And maybe in terms of like long-term influence because, the early Burzum stuff fit right in with Mayhem and Dark Throne in terms of the nihilistic kind of, Well,
kind of, I think this is where he kind of split away. I mean, even in Hvis Lyset Tarus, I think that's, you can definitely see where he's headed.
The ambient moments are there in that song.
And it's really starting to, okay, this is Burzum and it's not just some other black metal band, because a lot of the time it was kind of interchangeable a lot to the untrained ear. And Filosofem came out in 96, and we're going to be listening to Dunkelheit's Darkness, one of the first songs ever recorded under the Burzum moniker.
Yeah, and in fact, well, he claims that when he recorded this is what made him decide to change the name from Uruk-hai, which is a Tolkien reference, to Burzum, which actually Burzum itself is a Tolkien reference from a speech from Mordred in one of the Tolkien novels.
So he was good with picking up evil words,
Yeah, exactly. He makes references to, there's a song called the Crying Orcs and stuff like that. Yeah. So he's he has maybe a minor sense of humor. I don't know. He generally doesn't seem like he does, but maybe somewhere deep in that pit of blackness.
Yeah,
he's like the Grinch. Maybe somewhere in there.
If everything was done in Norwegian titles, I think I would be happier because it's a little bit more of a mystery. I mean, it's like watching a subtitled horror film. I think you can kind of like immerse yourself
more unsettling or something.
Yeah, and it's so outside of your realm of experience that it seems that much more crazy.
Yeah. And what you hear in this song, which opens the record up, Dunkelheit or Darkness or Burzum or whatever the hell you want to call it, it's very like we heard in the last song, kind of otherworldly almost. It's a beautiful song, but it's also very mean too. It's very spiteful. And I read somewhere someone made a comment that the vocals have been processed so many times that it's removed the humanity from the voice, which I thought was a really cool statement. Because
supposedly the vocals are recorded on like a headset you'd talk to the guy in the booth with.
Yeah,
like something that just sounds terrible. It's compressed.
Yeah,
like really bad.
It's very alien. And I think again he's an artful guy. It's weird, and I think it's one of the reasons that hipsters or indie rock people or even avant musician people are drawn to Burzum in some sort of way, because I think he's actually thinking about stuff and
like what he did with the guitars, how he recorded the guitars on this reminds me of something that Can would have done, the German kind of prog band that was known for,
it's very krauty,
for using all these weird patch chords into the stove or whatever. But he actually didn't use an amp at all. He like took his guitar, plugged it into like a stereo receiver, and then had a pedal, like an old fuzz pedal into it.
It's very fuzzy. It's got a 70s tone, but it's incredible.
There's a lot of noise going on, but there's also a lot of precision. Like you actually hear notes. It doesn't sound like you listen to it on headphones or listen to it on a good stereo, and it actually sounds full, even though there's so much noise.
And then near the end of the song, you hear some really cool, clean spoken vocals, but they're again, even though they're clean, they're not like they still make you feel sort of foreign or odd, unsettling, in a sense. But it's cool. I mean, it's beautiful but spiteful. It's all these kinds of things. And I do want to point out one thing I noticed in it about the 305 mark. Emperor steals a riff from this in "With Strength I Burn" from Anthems.
I believe it.
What's that?
I believe it.
Yeah, so it's right there. But
I mean, Burzum were probably one of the most influential black metal bands in the scene, without a doubt.
Them and Mayhem and probably Dark Throne were.
But I think Burzum, as far as being influential to really kind of forward thinking like band leaders.
Yep.
I think Burzum was the band that kind of not necessarily getting the kind of riffs that they necessarily do all the time, but thinking about how they construct the music and creating their own sound. And
well, I think they influenced probably people like the Ulvers, like the Enslaves, bands that were able to progress much further, much quicker, away from some of the stuff without going like symphonic or something,
like going Dimmu Borgir or something,
Borgir style, And then we this will be the only record that we actually play two songs off of, because it is a Decibel Hall of Fame record and thus deserves.
It's the one. It's the only Burzum record I own.
Is it? Yeah, there you go. And Jesus Todd, or Death of Jesus, is the second song we're going to play. So this is kind of the 1-2 punch. This song's a little bit, it's got a little bit more up and go to it. The riff drum combo is pretty delicious, I said.
The drums sound terribly awful.
Yeah.
Terribly awfully awesome.
But I think it's the best drum performance I've heard in any Burzum song.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
they're
catchy.
monotonous. I mean, they sound like they're recorded like in a paper sack, but I love how it sounds.
Exactly.
It sounds terrible, but great.
Exactly. And, it's kind of your average sort of Christian hating champagne jam is what I wrote down, kind of a Mr. Show reference there. But, it kind of feels like a De Mysterious Mayhem type song mixed with like a more folky early enslaved kind of song, like kind of mashed together. One thing I do want to mention about Filosofem is this record, when it came out in 96, obviously the notoriety of Varg and things had taken seed at that point, but it hit the indie charts in England and in Norway too. So it was hitting like non-metal charts and things like that. And even one of the songs near the end of the record, one of the ambient tunes, was used in Gummo.
That's
for
right.
the soundtrack. So kind of.
And Electric Wizard was in Gummo too.
Yeah, exactly. Nice. And so was Sleep. So they had a tune on there as well. So, and then we're going to close things out with a newer tune from Belus, which is one of the two newer records, the sort of post-prison records that's come out, and that's a song called Kaimadalthas Nedstigning, and
it's just a handful of consonants.
Yeah, exactly. We have no idea what that song means, but we'll talk more about the song when we come back, but do pay attention. It has some, I guess, hipster qualities to it. See if you pick up on those and what your take is on them. So enjoy Dunkelheit, Jesus Todd, and whatever the hell I just said that song was called from Belus.
It's fine, you'll find it. It's like track 4.
Nightfall and penetrating darkness, a chill rising from the soil. I can summon the near life has new meaning.
deg som til mørkets dyr, derom er dømt.
Kaimadalthas, Nedstigning, and before that, Jesus Todd and Dunkelheit from Filosofem. So we've come to Belus.
Jesus Todd sounds.
I'm sure I'm mispronouncing it. It's probably Jesus Todd or something.
Todd or something, but
yeah, death of Jesus.
Yeah, Jesus.
Fun for the whole family. But yeah, Belus was this was a record that was wrought with expectations. Obviously, I doubt they were met for most people, but that doesn't make it a bad record. It's just that
I mean it's a hype machine.
17 years. I mean that's a long time, and it's
although there's been a lot of like Unanimated, and there's a hand like Seance. A lot of these bands that have been basically kaput for years have come back and put some.
But
really
they
good
weren't
work together.
Prison for I mean there was just all this other stuff attached to it.
And the two Prison records that are all keyboard that are horseshit, just fucking terrible. And they almost seemed like this is back when Misanthropy Records was still around putting these out, and they seem to basically be paying their rent and keep the lights on with these records,
milking it. That people just buy them on controversy and not on merit.
It was the kind of record that a kid would like. Oh, I've heard a lot about Burzum, and they end up getting snookered with one of these piece of crap records. But.
Yeah, and I think Belus took me a while to get into, as I know it took you and most people I've talked to. It's a grower, but I think any great Burzum record doesn't hit you right away because there's so many different weird subtleties sort of happening. I think the back end of that record, from this track 4 to the end till 8, is pretty fantastic. A couple of the early tunes sound like they could have been on Filosofem, which I think
they were written at that era too.
And there's nothing wrong with that. It just didn't add anything new. For 17 years of like.
Although I was kind of wanting nothing new to some degree. Like it was kind of nice in the early on. It's almost like getting to know them again.
That's true. That's a good way of putting it. And then you, with this track, you start to add in some kind of new elements. It's kind of bringing more unique things in. I noticed like almost an industrial sort of German krautrock kind of feel to it, just like you said.
There's like new wave stuff.
Yeah,
as well. It's weird.
The sort of Joy Division, Depeche Mode feel in the middle is kind of odd with the sort of vocals, the repeated sort of clean chanting vocals over and over again. And they're, like I said, there's like an indie ambience to it, like, along with some of the cool arpeggios.
Well, there's actually some like kind of upbeat songs as well. Not necessarily upbeat, but there's more like major chord sounding stuff, a little bit fuller and brighter. Yeah, but still has that kind of underpinning of despair or whatever to it. And
even some of the instrumental tunes, like the closing number, the conclusion song, which is like 9 minutes. We didn't have time to play it, but it doesn't need all the despairing vocals and things to still create that great atmosphere that they're able to sort of achieve.
Well, apparently on Belus, what was it? Irokai, I think that's how it's pronounced.
Irokai, the old band name?
Yeah, but that was actually a song. From 88 or 89. It was supposedly reworked on this record, but I don't know which track it is. I couldn't find exactly what that was. Yeah, but that might be why we're hearing some of that old, Burzum creeping in.
It could have been one of those first 3 tunes.
I would assume it probably was.
And then we get to the end of the road, which not too many months after Belus, which will be coming out this upcoming week, if you're listening to this currently as you download this. Valen is coming out in March of 2011. So we've got 2 albums in less than 12 months, which is pretty impressive.
Well, and it doesn't seem to necessarily be a cash grab either.
No,
both of them are actually quite good.
Yeah. And the song we're going to end with, the sort of title track, kind of starts with a great sort of proto-enslaved riff, kind of older enslaved type riff. It's very repetitive, but I put it, it has like a lot of cool like minor variations that color it, kind of give it subtle textures. So they kind of use like the 1 or 2, kind of main riffs and just sort of play back and forth.
Well, I think that's always been Burzum's kind of strong suit, and the biggest turnoff to people is the repetitiveness. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But that's also kind of like, I know that was like totally enamoring to people like Fenrez who you go and do Transylvanian Hunger where you play one riff 36 times in a row.
And I don't think this stuff is dissimilar to the sort of movement that grew up in the 2000s when Burzum kind of disappeared for a while, like the whole Neurosis ISIS Mogwai.
Oh, exactly. It just wasn't drenched in the controversy and satanic imagery.
Well, I think it's interesting he comes out and he's almost more relevant now because that scene had taken place for 10 years when he was away. Yeah. And here this stuff almost fits really nicely with all of that, And there's almost some solos that break out, like at the 338 mark or the 442 mark. There's like it's almost like he wants to do something a little bit more flaring, but he kind of like reins it back in.
Well, even how this song is layered is pretty interesting compared to what he's done in the past. You know, it's much more progressive sounding.
Sure, it's almost contemplative, whereas like the other stuff was like bitter and angry. This is like a little bit more. I don't want to say, dare I say, warm, but it
yeah. Well, I think everything up until Filosofem was just like drenched in hatred.
Yeah,
and then Filosofem has this kind of more wondering kind of vibe to it. But
sure. Well, although Death of Jesus is pretty straightforght, but
yeah,
some of the later stuff,
as an album in general.
But and then I don't know, Fallen, for some odd reason, and many of you may not have heard this yet because it isn't officially out, but I'm sure a few of you have poked around the internet and listened to it.
It's been streamed on a couple sites, I know too.
It's getting some mixed reactions due to some of the clean vocals which you'll hear in this song, but I don't know. I kind of dig that
doesn't bother me at all.
Yeah,
it just reminds me of how Enslaved incorporates. He's not stretching himself to where it sounds terrible.
Yeah, he's not trying to like do like bad soil work, clean vocals or something.
No, it's more chanting or more, kind of folk singing or something.
It fits the whole Norse kind of feel of Odin-y thing that he's trying to do. So, but we hope that you've enjoyed some of our choices of Burzum, and let us know. Maybe you're also in the same boat as Mark and I in terms of being an anti-Burzum person for a long time, and maybe this show can help you open your warm heart to the evil blackness of Burzum.
Or at least know where they fit.
Yeah, sure. You can find some level of appreciation. But let us know what you thought. Shoot us an email at requiempodcast@gmail.com. Leave us a comment on iTunes. Check us out on Facebook, Mark and Jason. Or, you too could be a producer for this show by making a donation on our website, requiempodcast.com. We've got a lot of cool artwork. Mark's got a lot of his original Decibel artwork up there. We've got mugs, all kinds of little merchandise kind of things up there.
And we get a little cut. Every little bit helps keep the show going. So
fantastic. So let us know what you thought, and enjoy Fallen from the upcoming Burzum Fallen. And I'm Jason.
And I'm Mark.